Leadership isn't theory, it's practice. Welcome to The Standard, the podcast where leadership, wellness, and excellence come together to help you grow into the leader you're meant to be. Today's guest is Kym Hampton, a WNBA legend, European Basketball League superstar, entrepreneur, and face of some of the world's leading brands. She's a sought-after actress and entertainer. Today, Kym will share her thoughts on some of the keys to achieving performance excellence and how you can overcome barriers to success, both perceived and real.
I'm your host, Raymond Hall, and welcome back to The Standard, where we don't just talk about success, we talk about what it actually costs to become the person who can sustain it. If this is your first time here, this isn't surface level conversation. We get into the mindset, the discipline, and the decisions that shape who people really are long before anyone's watching and long before the spotlight fades. And today, we've got someone who lives that. Today's guest is a champion, a professional athlete, a performer, a leader. But titles don't tell the story. What matters is the standard behind them, because people don't reach that level by accident, and they don't stay there without becoming someone different along the way. So today isn't about the resume, it's about the mindset, the discipline, the decisions that built it. So Kym, let's start there. When you strip everything else away, who is Kym Hampton? And not the version people see, the version you have to answer to when you look in the mirror.
I would have to say that I'm someone who is definitely more committed to just being more conscious, committed to living my truth. And I would have to say someone who is willing to challenge my old beliefs and just to, I don't know, just someone who's, I'm just committed to being real and just being real for me, like what that means for me at this point in my life. You know, like a lot of times, I think when you're younger, you have a tendency to settle for what we think is expected or what we think looks like success or what we think we want in life. But I'm just more committed now to really finding what it is that I truly like, what I'm passionate about, and the things that I want to do.
No, awesome. You know, I was thinking about the same thing. Someone asked me the other day about your core in terms of who you are. And as we go through our careers and we go through leadership training, we have different experiences. You know, there's a lot of things that we tend to take on that tend to build us out, you know, as leaders and as people. But we still have the core. So when you think about it and your identity, what hasn't changed about you, no matter how much success you've had?
Definitely the way I treat people, the way I make people feel. That hasn't changed. I'm just going to always be the same. I don't care how much money, power, fame that you have. I think just treating people kindly is just one of the best things that you could ever do for a person. So that'll never change.
Okay. Now, did you have anything that as you were along your journey that you realized was probably holding you back that had to go?
Oh, definitely. I would have to say old limiting thoughts and beliefs. I guess real time, just to tell a real story. Before I even became an athlete, I'm talking about 5 or 6, I really loved to sing. And, you know, the adults in my life would, you know, say, have you heard Kym sing? Like, Kym can really sing. And I remember I did some kind of play. It was a school play or something. And I got stuck out stage. The curtain was supposed to close behind us after we curtsied, you know, and things. And I got stuck out front on stage. I was by myself. And so I was like, when I realized I was by myself, I was kind of like, you know, and I was like, oh my God. And then when the parents and everyone saw my face, they were like, you know, they kind of started chuckling, you know, but chuckling kind of like, oh, so cute. You know, she got, so, you know, but I turned around immediately and started trying to find the entrance to the curtain. But, you know, that day, it just kind of created a moment, a belief in my life that being in the spotlight, being on stage wasn't a safe place. So, just having to, as I've moved on in life, I became a star athlete, and, that spotlight belief, that fear definitely even spilled over into that. So I would definitely say just learning to limit old beliefs and just unpack them and find any truth or dismantle the untruth in it. So
Yeah, thanks for providing that example. 'Cause that's what this show is all about. These real time examples where people can really understand, particularly what people see is the outcome. They don't see the journey. They don't understand some of the experiences. They just see the finished product. And I certainly can relate to you. One of the things that I've struggled with, as an executive, at some of the world's largest firms, is sometimes, to be quite honest, I'm the only one in the room who look like me. And so there's a lot that goes, into that. And so you do have these moments where you start to question, you start to seek different pathways to show that you belong and all of those things. But it was something that a mentor of mine, and I do believe in mentorship, and we'll talk about that here in just a bit. But it's one of those things that helped me get past that because it wasn't the environment holding me back. It wasn't people holding me back. It was some of those beliefs that I've had, even about myself, that I had to get past that was holding me back. So thanks for sharing that.
thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So, Kym, at what point, when you start looking at that journey to being a professional athlete, did you really believe that, okay, this is real? I really can become that. So it wasn't hope. It wasn't, I think. You were certain in your mind that, yeah, I can do this.
It would be my freshman year of high school. That's when I became an athlete. That's when I started participating in sports. And I started out playing JV as a freshman, but by the end of the year, I was being double and triple teamed because I was a fast learner. And then at the end of basketball season, the track coach asked me to throw the shot put. And I threw the shot put, and I won the state championship as a freshman. So it was then my freshman year. But I would have to say that I solidified it my sophomore year because during the summer, I became a lifeguard. And so I played in the park all summer long with the boys. So when I came back, I only dressed dressed varsity my freshman year. But when I came back for my sophomore year, I was starting varsity averaging 16 and 10. And I knew I was going to go to college. So, yeah. And that's when I just really started to believe in myself and just things started to make sense and click because as a freshman, I was like 6 feet tall, 7 foot wingspan, and everything. It just wasn't making sense. Yeah. So,
So, so I want to step back to something. You mentioned the coach.
hmm
And when you start thinking about people who have invested or leaned into us early, in
hmm
these journeys, was there anybody specific that poured into you early, long before the world saw what was coming?
yeah, I would have to say it was, of course, my family always believed in us all, but it was one teacher in particular. She was my fifth grade teacher. Her name was Miss Thicklin, and I know she was about 6 feet tall. Um, and she would always say to me, "Stand up straight, stand up. You beautiful, stand up straight." And she was one of those teachers. And she always just, said things to me every day. "You're beautiful. Act like it. Being tall is a privilege. God didn't make a mistake when he made you. He made you tall for a reason. Look, me and you, the only two tall people in this room. Act like it." And so she was the one that was really forceful with having me to reevaluate how I saw myself. Because being tall as a kid, kids are mean. I got all the tall jokes, of course, Holly Green Giant, and just all the tall stuff. But and it used to and she saw that it used to kind of make me feel really timid and make me feel bad, and everything. So she would get all the students a lot. So she was really my ally then. Yeah.
No, that's good. My grandfather was mine. I often tell this story, especially growing up farming community, Eastern North Carolina. And you're in sports, we're competing against some of these larger cities, and doubt starts to creep in. And he used to just tell me, he's like, "Look, there are only two important days in a person's life, the day they were born and the day they realized they were born. And that's something that has always stuck with me when I get in those moments where doubt starts to creep in and, start to get a little uncertain about the path I'm going on and those sort of things, because that certainty isn't there. It always anchors me back to my purpose. And that's always made me feel a little bit better in terms of where I'm going next. So thanks for sharing that. You talked about when you became certain in terms of it wasn't just a dream. It wasn't, I think I can get there. And when it started to feel real, to you, was there a specific moment or was there any special event that happened that you saw, yeah, this is in reach now?
I would probably say when I was in college, um, I got an opportunity to play on some, like USA teams, and I would say then I remember we went to Taipei, Taiwan, and I found out that there was professional basketball abroad for women. And so I then kind of set my goals on that. Not kind of, I set my goals on that. I knew that I wanted to go abroad and continue to play. But it was college when I realized I can definitely do this.
Okay. So that's interesting. And I really want to know this because I can only imagine the esteem that comes from that. There probably is a little bit of excitement in terms of being able to do something that many of your peers weren't invited to do when you start talking about USA basketball and all that kind of stuff. Um, but did it raise the pressure on you? Did you feel the need to do more? How did it feel in that moment?
I wouldn't say that it raised the pressure. It just, well, what I did find out, I'll say this, is I found out how political the game is, especially on the women's side. It's super political. I learned very early on in college that I chose the wrong school. I mean, I could have gone to UCLA or Tennessee. I could have, but when I graduated from high school, Miss Basketball wasn't big. So I didn't know what school to go to. I didn't know who Pat Head Summit was. I was getting letters every single day. They even had one of our football players talking to me because he was going there to play football, from my high school. You should go, we could go there and, tear it up, and stuff. But I wanted to get away and I didn't know. And I found that you really need to go to certain schools to really be seen. If you notice and you look at the Olympic team, okay, now we have some pros in there, but most of the people on the Olympic team are from like 4 or 5 schools. And so, I didn't understand that. And I think that was, it wasn't pressure. I think it was more of kind of like oh wow, like that's not fair. It kind of hurt a little bit, just to know that you're probably not going to, just because, other coaches, other people, have more of a say. So I would say it was more of that.
Okay. Okay. So earlier we talked about the finished product. And when people look at it, I know there are a lot of women, and men, boys and girls who look up to you in terms of what you've been able to achieve on the court. And they see that finished product. But I don't think they really understand the cost sometimes that, people pay to get there. And if they did, they probably wouldn't sign up if they truly understood it.
Mhm.
So I guess my question for you is, what were some of those things that you may have sacrificed, even personal along the way?
It was probably things like just having to be committed to it, having to sacrifice hanging out with friends, having to sacrifice holidays, um, having to just sacrifice time, knowing, you couldn't hang out because you had to get up and run because you were getting ready to, the season was coming. You had to be in shape. You had to do certain things. You had to watch what you ate. Just you had to make all kinds of sacrifices. Then when it came to the professional game, again, we had to play overseas. There was no professional basketball in America yet. And so, it was just the sacrifice of family, of time, the sacrifice of being in the United States of America, having to go abroad for 7, 8, 9 months out of the year just to play and do what it is that you love to do. But yeah, those sacrifices, I sacrificed relationships, trying to have a long distance relationship and you're away for like 8 or 9 months. Yeah, that's kind of tough. Um, so it was a lot.
Was there ever a moment when you thought, the cost of getting there might outweigh what you were trying to achieve?
No, no, there was never a moment. I mean, I looked at things that I may have wanted to do, and I was like, that stuff's gonna always be there. Me being able to live my dream, to go to college on a scholarship and get a free education, to play basketball abroad and to travel the world. And none of that stuff outweighed. No, it wasn't even close.
Yeah. I remember the sacrifices are real. I started in the military and you touched on something that kind of took me back to, some of those early sacrifices, whether it be parent birthdays, children birthdays, different holidays, anniversaries, and things like that, that a little bit hard for you to be there with your family when you're halfway around the world. But I think having the support of my mom, I'll tell you one of the things that she would always say when there was an opportunity, it was more like, do you? Like you've worked hard, you deserve it, you need to go ahead and be the very best that you can be. And that gave me a little bit more relief that it's okay because you did feel some sort of guilt not, not being there and not being around. But I think having that support system, in our lives is invaluable when it comes to us achieving what we want to achieve. So as we transition a little bit, Kim, and I think no path is without its challenges. So when you think about some of the early struggles as you were on this journey, what are some early struggles, people don't talk about?
I would say maybe just as far as struggles, I think probably just consistently showing up every day, especially when you're not reaping the rewards or when things aren't going smooth and you're not seeing effort in the work that you're putting in and you're not seeing the commitment. Um, I would say those are some of the things because you struggle with, should I keep going? Should I throw the towel in? Should I quit? But just the consistency to show up every day until you get to the other side is probably, one of the struggles that people don't talk about, but it's real.
Yeah, I agree. And then that comes down to a lot of things because it can be, physical, it can be mental. Sometimes, as you just mentioned, it can be emotional, and sometimes it can be all three.
Hmm.
And my old CEO used to say all the time, and I thought it may sound cliche, but it's lonely at the top too.
Hmm.
So, Kim, can you take me to a specific day that, what, I don't want to show up today? It's hard. I'm tired. I may be a little bit frustrated, but you showed up anyway. Was there ever a moment where that happened? To just kind of let us know what you were doing.
You know, for me, it wasn't that I wouldn't ever show up. I mean, I wouldn't ever miss a workout. I mean, even when I was home for the summer, because we got the summer months off playing abroad, I always did what I had to do as far as working out, but but for me, I think it became, especially as I became a pro, came more about, could I push myself to where I need to be or to where I want to be? So I hired a trainer, just to really push me so that I could be where I would want, where I wanted to be. Because it always mattered to me to show up my best. Yeah, but I never had that issue of like, I don't feel like going to run today. I don't care if I went out last night because I'm home for the summer and, it's the down season. I won't say the off season, but the down season. But every morning I'll be getting up running, I just didn't want to be, you know what that's like trying to go back and all of a sudden now you're in training camp and you're having two a days. And it's like, oh no.
So that brings me to my next question because I would imagine for you to reach the very top of your profession as a basketball player, there were things that you did, and you just talked about that discipline, that commitment, to train, even when you may not feel like getting up out of the bed doing it. What do you do that others simply weren't willing to do? Because I would imagine that, over time in your career, whether it was here in the WNBA or whether it was abroad in another country, in another league, that you saw people who were just as talented, but they weren't getting the same results. So what were you doing that others simply weren't willing to do?
I mean, really think I was doing anything too far out of the norm. I just tried to be consistent with the things that I needed to do. I know that I needed my conditioning, I needed to be at a certain level. But other than that, and then I understood what it was, the commitment to be away or the commitment to sacrifice. And I think I just made peace with that. So mentally, I think I was just in a good place that comes with the territory. If you're going to be a standout athlete and you're going to do all of these things, it just comes with the territory. So it could be that, maybe just the mental space of learning how to navigate that and those waters and being good with it. But I don't know. Everyone's situation is different.
So when you think about the habits that you've created over time to help you along the way, were there any that you just said, you know what, I'm going to do these things every day and I'm going to protect them at all costs, regardless of what else is going on?
Yeah, I think for me it was my professionalism and my integrity. It was like a couple of things. Um, I always showed up at practice and I did what I needed to do. I was, a good teammate. I was positive. And then my integrity. I wasn't going to be out, doing things. Or if we were out of the country doing something, I'm not going to do anything crazy and just, disrupt what was going on. So for me, it was a couple of habits that, those were habits that I was going to always have integrity. And I was always going to be professional, just show up, respectful manner, shall I say.
Okay. I'm going to ask you the question a little bit differently. Were there any habits you had to break?
I knew I had to let's just say reel myself back in, and stuff like that. Breaking, maybe in the off season, hanging out too much, going out, and stuff. Definitely, having a good time. Um, you work hard, you play hard. But it was just knowing when, okay, you have to cut things, you got to shut that down. Okay, no, we're going out. You shut down the drinking and things like that. And it wasn't like, it was always just like social drinking. It wasn't like any heavy drinking, but anything that you're doing, during the time that you're trying to get in shape, and things like that, it could just be an annoyance to you. So it was just knowing when it was time to shut everything down, start eating better, eating right, not eating late at night and things like that. So I would just say just reeling things in.
Okay. Okay. Kim, I want to talk to you a little bit about leadership, under pressure. You know how to pressure bust a pipe, right? And we all experience as leaders when you're accountable for, leading the team, regardless of or irrespective of what environment you're in, whether it's on the court or whether it's in the boardroom. What did pressure expose about your leadership? Was there ever a moment where, people were looking at you for answers and you didn't have one? And what did you do? How did you handle it?
The pressure made me realize that I had a couple of choices. I could lead unity or division. I could lead sell or put the team or the team's goals up front. So it just let me know that I had choices. Those choices that I made would greatly affect the team. And thank goodness I was always one of the people that, I really believe in team and I feel like together we can accomplish more. So I always led with thinking of others and making other people feel comfortable, making other people feel good. And so, yeah, that pressure taught me that because, I've seen other people lead in, in the other way, where it was just more negative, pointing the finger at people and blaming people and never ever taken the blame. So I just realized, or you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, so and then it just makes me feel good to treat people well. And I think about how I would want to be treated in that situation. Or I wouldn't want, I want to treat people the way I'd like to be treated as well. So,
hmm No, that's good. I'll give you some of my experience, as executive, and I had to learn this over time. I was initially started out, I'm the leader and I have to have all the answers.
mhm.
And there are those moments, especially when you're transitioning from industry to industry, nobody knows everything. And what I found is what you just said, the power in teams. And what people really want is to be valued, respected, and have an opportunity to contribute. And so involving people in the formation of the solution, of the idea has really helped me create an even more engaged team, a more high performing team, as a result of it. So that's some really good insight.
Yeah, I definitely agree. People definitely want to be seen, heard. People want to contribute. They want to know that their contribution is valued. So,
Mhm. So this whole, where are leaders born or are leaders made? What's your perspective on that? I mean, were you always a leader, even as a little girl in Louisville, Kentucky? Or was it something you grew into?
I would say that I was always a leader. Um, Always a leader. But I feel that um, you definitely get better at leadership when you learn a lot more about people as you get older, and the more opportunity you have to lead. But my personality, like, I'm one of those people where my friends and family, like, I should have gone into psychology and been a therapist, like, for real, because everyone comes to me with all of this, but I just try to take a step back perspective and just be fair. Like, it might even be my sister. I'm just using it as an example. But if it was something that she did wrong, I'm not gonna pump her up and make her feel right, because, you know, I'm gonna help her to see what's right and what's truth. And that's just kind of how I've always been. Like, I've had friends that were bullies, and they would, go now I'm talking in high school, make girls bring them their lunch money, give it to them every single day. And, and just stuff like that. And I was like, snatching the money back and giving it to them. I was like, don't ever do that again, And I was just always that superhero type of the person. Um, yeah, yeah, it's just who I was, who I am.
Is there one particular leader that you have come across in any of your spaces, whether it be on the court, whether it's a singer or some of your other endeavors that really stuck to you as, that's a great leader. That's who I want to emulate.
I think it's a lot of people. I see bits and pieces, because number one, I think when we think of people, when we look at people, unless you actually live with them, you don't get a chance to see how they are, like, 24/7. It's only the people, the close people, that you can actually say that's who I want to emulate, because that means you're getting the chance to see the good, the bad, the ugly, and all of it. So, that person, you could look at them in the boardroom and say, God, I want to leave like that person. They could go home and beat their wife every single day, and, be into child pornography and all kinds of stuff. So you don't know. So, um, I think for me, it was just taking bits and pieces, the things that I like. And, it's kind of like when they always say, this is just food for thought. I'm just throwing it out. Take what you want, leave the rest. I think it was just certain things that I appreciated from people. I took stuff from my grandmother. I took stuff from some of my coaches. It's just different people throughout my life that I realized, wow, that's pretty prolific. I like that. Those are some of the things.
And I think that's what most, our listeners, I hope that's one of the things that they take away from it is what you just described. My granddaddy used to say, stop trying to be somebody else. They're already taken, be yourself. It doesn't mean that there aren't, things that you can't take away from in terms of what people do, really well. I used to be a little boy practicing Michael Jordan moves in my driveway. Obviously, I ain't Michael Jordan either, but I I'm just saying there are things that we can take from others as we start to build out who we want to be, as leaders.
Hmm.
There are positives that we can take, and there are also things that probably show us who we don't want to be, just like who we want to be, and just being conscious of that.
Amen, brother.
This episode of The Standard is brought to you by Aurelius Global, LLC. Through its business and HR consulting division, Aurelius Global helps organizations strengthen leadership capability, improve workforce performance, and build cultures where excellence becomes sustainable, not accidental. If your organization is developing emerging leaders or navigating complex growth challenges, Aurelius Global delivers practical solutions grounded in real-world operating experience. Learn more at aureliusglobal.tech.
So one of the things that I want to touch on during our time together this morning, we're hearing a lot about the importance of mental health. Particularly, I would say when organizations start really paying attention to this, it was COVID. The COVID pandemic really started to help organizations understand, how important it is to take care of the whole employee, not just, coming to work, doing a job, getting paid for it, but the protection of that mental space or the emotional health is just as critical as doing some of the other things that are ancillary, like providing benefits and the things that we would do, anyway.
Hmm.
So when you think about in your world and the work that you do, whether it is, in the past on teams or whether it's, in some of your business ventures, today, what is your view on that? Has it changed over time where you're seeing more of a focus on this, or is it something that's probably not getting enough attention as it should?
No, I definitely feel like it's one of the topics, definitely, that everyone is, and I think it's in every industry, and I think too, because of like the Me Too movements and a lot of the different movements that went on. It's a lot of whistleblowing, and people aren't allowing themselves to be taken advantage of, to be talked to any kind of way, or to be pushed beyond what's reasonable. So I think it's a true thing, and I think it's something that just definitely needed to happen.
I know there were moments in my career where, again, you on one side you have this responsibility, you lead in this global team.
Hmm.
Then you have these other storms that are happening on your personal life that people have no idea, nor
Hmm.
do they really care either. What they expect is that you show up every day, that you do your job, that you lead people, and you do it in a way where it's high performing. And I remember, times where whether it was a loss of a parent or, other things or events that were happening that really tested you and it really brought on a lot of pressure. And so one of the things that I found, very useful is because that pressure can start to feel really heavy. And when you come in every day, you love your job, you love your role, but it can start to feel kind of heavy when you're trying to balance, everything else. And you can't be everything to everybody either. So it was really important when you start talking about, those relationships and really getting to know your leader, versus saying, hey, I want to emulate this person. Sometimes that person can be a good sounding board just for you to talk about some stuff. And so I think you're right. I think organizations have started to put a little bit more focus on the mental health, just like they do the financial health and some of the other components of the employee. But I think this is one that, as we start to see more programs in place, more apps, more access to tools that people can use whenever they need them, we'll then start to have a richer workforce, one that's more capable, one that's highly engaged, because they do have those resources where maybe 5, 10 years ago they were just non-existent, or maybe not non-existent, but they certainly weren't as abundantly available as they are today.
Yeah, definitely agree. Mm. And it is so needed. Um, and it's just so crazy. I think we've just evolved so much, like technology. And I feel like one of man's biggest issues is not just setting boundaries and taking time to step back. Um, just like how you start your day, the first thing people do is grab their phone in the morning, as soon as they wake up, not take a few deep breaths and just say some gratitude, thank you for this new day, thank you that I have a job to go to. Thank you for this house that I live in or this space that I live in. Thank you, for my children. Thank you for my spouse. Thank you. Just go into a barrage of gratitudes just to start your day, not just jumping up and immediately thinking about the things that you have to do, and just jumping into the day. And then you immediately start the autopilot thoughts again. I hate going to my job, and my boss is coming in today and, this, that, and I have to do this. And so I think that's just one of the biggest issues. We just don't know how to start our day and and then we don't know how to stop the negative. It's like, and when you think about a negative thought, like, let's just take, for example, you could be driving down the street and somebody cut you off, and you in your car blowing them off, flipping birds and talking to them, you saw me, I was coming out, and you talking, and you saw me, and then you happen to go in your sister's house, and then you're like, man, this man came out in front of me. Now you continue to tell the story. You keep it alive and keep it going. That's the stress. And people don't, and we don't realize that every thought we have releases a chemical that supports that thought. So if it's negative, 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 we talk about why cancer and Alzheimer and all of these diseases are so rampant. It's because, we're like living in like gutter water, because from our thoughts, and so it's just, I think we're not talking enough about helping people to think right and to stop the negative thoughts, stop living in the past, stop projecting the future. You don't even know how it's going to turn out, but you're already projecting bad thoughts on, why your business isn't going to work or why you're not going to get the promotion and things like that. So I think that's where we probably need to focus more on. Yes.
I completely
But
agree.
right,
It
time
takes,
right.
yeah, I agree with you. And it's all about, what we were talking about earlier too, and what this podcast is all about, the mindset, right? Because I believe that when you wake up in the morning, your first actions will determine the rest of your day. Some people will do what you said. They will grab that iPhone or Android or whatever device they have,
Mhm.
immediately start scrolling through the emails. So regardless of what depending on what the email was, it might be a good day for you, or it could already start you down a path where you're just firefighting all day. Versus is what I do and what works for me may not work for everybody else. The very first thing I do is I pray, and that kind of sets my day.
Okay.
And then it's, texting the people that you love. Hope you have a nice day. And then I get into the other aspects more from a professional, basis. But what I've learned over time is that kind of sets the tone, for my day in more of a positive way versus getting spent out over an email that somebody might have sent you at 1 o'clock in the morning when they know you were sleeping.
Yeah. So true.
So, Kim, when you think about um, beyond the game, and I see this a lot, whether you're talking about, military personnel that are entering retirement. For the last 20 years, they were used to this certain tempo. Every day, just coming in and doing what they do. And now the game slows down. And a lot of athletes, a lot of soldiers, a lot of corporate executives, they struggle with identity, when that happens. So can you talk to the audience about how do you evolve without losing who you are?
Wow. How do you evolve? I think first and foremost, what we have to really say to ourselves while we're in the moment, whether you're an executive, in the moment, whether you're an athlete or a celebrity or a star, whether you're working at a particular company, you have to remind yourself that we are not our titles, that, we have to separate that identity, that identifier, that this is all we are. Because if you think, you know, I- you work at a big company for X amount of years and you have a big title, and then all of a sudden they reorg and let you go, then, that can be a heavy hit to some people's egos too. And so I think that's where I would start, just understanding that we were people before we got anywhere, before we got any credentials. We were people. But it was hard. I mean, even with me, when I had to retire abruptly. It was like one day I went to practice and my knee swole up, and and then I had to have an exploratory surgery, and then found out that the cartilage was severely worn behind my kneecap. And although I was able to go back 5 weeks later, it happened again, like 3 days later. And so the doctor was kind of like, I mean, what, do you want to keep doing this over and over again? It's just not enough time. And so it was just really hard for me to all of a sudden have so much time on my hands. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? The times that I would be at practice, the times that I would be getting treatment, the times that we would be on the road, and just the camaraderie of the team, and just us going out to dinner together. I mean, we could still do that, but it is really, really tough because it's routine. It's like what you've been doing all of that time. And then all of a sudden, and we're talking about me, I had played for like 24 years. And so it's like now all of a sudden, no basketball. It's like, what? Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it is. And what you described, it wasn't necessarily planned transition. Sometimes transition are event based and they're unplanned. And you're right, a number of people or executives rather, they're not ready for that transition. They never thought about it. Then there's this major event where maybe the company, the profitability is down, or maybe they've lost clients or customers and they need to make those decisions. And it isn't personal, it's just what they have to do, to keep the company going. And unfortunately, people are impacted, but are they ready for that transition? And so as you start thinking about when you stepped into music and you stepped into acting, were these things that you were proactively doing because you knew one day your career on the court would end, and so you wanted to make sure that there were things that you could transition and move into pretty seamlessly, or did those things happen once you stopped playing?
I was kind of laying the groundwork before, because again, I played in the WNBA when it first started. So we were like treated like rock stars. And, like Spike Lee reached out to me personally, said, "Hey, Kim, I want you to come and audition for this movie." And, like Roy Ayers reached out to me, wanted me to sing on, one of his songs, so a lot of stuff was happening. CBS did like this feature of me singing and they aired it during halftime of one of our games. And so everything kind of started to happen, but and that's when I signed with Wilhelmina, Click Models, and then Wilhelmina, like the big modeling agency in New York. So I didn't plan those things, although those were the things that I secretly wanted to do. They just kind of evolved and kind of happened, and I just said yes and stepped into it. Yeah. The craziest thing is, before I even stepped foot on the court at Madison Square Garden to play, the Knicks, the organization, asked me if I would sing the anthem for a New York Knicks and New York, Miami Heat game. And here I am thinking, okay, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. Lord have mercy, what did I get myself into? When I see, first of all, the mic was so hot. I mean, I had it down and I was walking to half court where they have you stand. I saw 20,000 people standing up looking at me, and I was just like, oh my God, what did I? And I heard myself up over the speed. I was like, oh shit, so But and I did it and I got through, but it was just so nerve wracking, but it was something that I wanted to do. And so I pushed myself. It was just like, woo! And I was just ready for the moment and ready to explore it. And if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, okay.
So let me ask you something because that's another piece. If I'm a young professional or even an executive, and what you're describing, there has to be either a supreme level of confidence that you have to do something new, or you have a high risk tolerance, right? Because people tend to play it safe, and I think that's what keep people sometimes from learning and growing because they don't bet on themselves or they just comfortable, where they are. So how do you develop, again, going back to that mindset and being a little bit, more courageous? What drove you to say, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna try it anyway, or I'm just going to do it. If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't. But I'm going to try. Like, what was kind of the motivation behind that?
Well, you have to understand it was something that I loved.
Hmm.
It was something that I felt somewhat comfortable doing. And I had dreams of being a singer from like 6 years old, 5 and 6 years old. I was singing everything with my little brush in my hand. I was like, and everything, And so it was, and modeling was always something that I wanted to do even as a kid. And so when those opportunities happened, it wasn't so foreign to me. Did I know those industries? No. Uh, but I felt that I had talent and I felt like they approached me. And so I felt like something was there and the opportunity could be there. Because there's a difference when I'm seeking it out. I'm going to agencies and dropping off my cards and just trying to get signed by an agency. So it's a little bit different. It's like getting drafted or going to a tryout, basically.
Well, I also think the importance of having what I call truth tellers in your circle is important too. I love singing, but my sister be the first one to say, "Nah, bro, that ain't your lane." Right? So sometimes it might hurt, it might feel a little tough, but I think that's where the whole definition of tough love come from. It's love just the same. It may not feel good in the moment, but you need people that will tell you when you got something stuck in your teeth, rather than just let you go down a path knowing that that's probably not the path you should go down.
Or something stuck in your nose.
Right?
I'll
That's right.
tell it. I was literally getting gas the other day, and I was like, "Hey, when you get a chance, wipe your nose." That He's like, "Oh, where?" He was like, "Really?" So I was like, "Yeah," because I want someone to tell me. So I got that. Had to. And I am that truth teller for a whole lot of people. People are just like, "What, Kim? What?" And I'm just like, "Okay, this is coming from love. I'm the truth slayer."
That's right. And I feel, I mentor and coach a lot of young people. And when I'm approached and they'll say, "Hey, Raymond, do you mind being my mentor?" That first conversation is probably the most important conversation
Hmm.
because what I'm seeking to understand is how do you accept feedback? Because
Mm.
if you're one that can accept feedback, you don't have to agree with what I say, but you're coming to me because there's something that I have that you want to tap into to make you a better leader or something that can help you develop. So a big part of it is feedback. And so being able to accept feedback and then use it to where it's beneficial to you and your growth, I think it's important. And you have to have a mentor or be comfortable that people are going to tell you the truth versus just kind of play the game. And so it's not always an exact science when you start talking about the matching. That's why I would encourage people to, if you're seeking that, to just take your time and make sure that it's something that is really going to work for you.
It's true. And especially if you're the mentor as well, it's like you want to make sure you're not wasting your time. On and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean some people aren't ready to be mentored. Some people think that they are, or they're just looking for like a quick fix, a band-aid. They're not looking for something that is going to set them up for the long haul and give them, you know, or they're not ready to put the work in. Um, and so I think, you just kind of want to screen that out as well. And just, uh,
Kim, one of the things that, we often talk about too is we start talking about executive presence, rather. When you first walk into a room, what that can convey
Mhm.
to either an interviewer, or if you're seeking a job, or you're looking at a different opportunity, or in your case, trying to get a modeling contract.
Mhm.
When you start thinking about presence, what does your presence communicate before you even say a word?
Um, I would say confidence. I would say strength and kindness. I would say those three things.
That was awesome. And it was profound too, because it actually, my next question was, can your presence open doors and can they close them?
They can do
And
both.
yes.
They can definitely do both. Uh, because every time you meet a person that you would like and a door open to be, it's their perception of you and how you approach the situation and how you come into a situation. I mean, we've all experienced meeting people and just being completely turned off by what that person was saying, how they were doing, how they just approached the whole situation. And then we've met those people where it's like, oh wow, that's nice. Okay, let's have another conversation. Let's take this. So I think, yeah, definitely both.
I interview a lot of people, and I would tell you that my approach probably has shifted in the last 5, 10 years. A lot of it is because the workforce dynamics has changed. I remember early on in my career, companies hired doers. We'll hire you, you do this job. And then we hire thinkers. And managing thinkers is a little bit more delicate than managing, doers. And so one of the things that I look for, people talk a lot about cultural fit. And I would, even dumb it down to team fit. But some are surprised in terms of what I'm looking for. It's not necessarily the technical expertise. I already know just by looking at your resume that you can do the job from a technical perspective. I'm looking at other things that you talked about, kindness. So when I ask questions, how is that showing up? Can you lead with empathy? All of those things, when you start talking about a engaged workforce, that actually matters more today
Mhm.
than some of the other things that may have mattered 5 years ago. So you're 100%. Your presence encompasses a lot of things, and a lot of people just talk about your appearance. I really don't care what your hair look like. I don't care how many tattoos you got. Doesn't matter. What I care most about is how you treat people, because that's what's going to ultimately help a company be successful.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. So Kim, we usually try to wrap up this show asking one question. And I'm probably going to ask you a couple more because I'm enjoying this so much. But so bear with me. So, if you had to write a letter to your younger self, what would you say? And would you listen? Because if as I thought about this question, I don't know if I was at a stage when I was younger to listen. I mean, now I would, knowing what I know. But if you had to write a letter to yourself, what would it look like?
Can you give me a ballpark of age? What age like what era are you talking about?
Let's say you probably started to step into your superpowers around 15, 16.
Okay. I would tell her, I would just say, Kim, don't believe everything you think, because thoughts just run in our heads and, we're thinking stuff and thinking that that person might be thinking stuff, and that person's not even thinking about us. Or we're thinking we have to do this and be this and all of that. So I would say embrace who you are because it's going to all make sense later. It's not making sense now. You haven't gotten there, but honestly, it's going to make sense. I would say, always give yourself grace. Be kind to yourself. You're kind to everyone else. Be kind to yourself. Um, I would say to not judge and compare yourself to others, uh, because, each one of us has our own different DNA, and we weren't meant to be like anyone else. We were created, and all of us were blessed with our own unique gifts and talents. I mean, if you stop and think about it, we have things that we are good at. And I think those things were meant for us to capitalize and and to be good at. But I would also tell myself to give your best in everything that you do. Definitely, like, show up and make sure you work hard in everything that you do, because it definitely separates you from everyone else. I mean, I don't know if you know it. I have a 21-year-old, and I'm like, common sense is not so common. And it's like, you just things that you have to tell them. It's just like, you want to say, duh, and stuff. And so, because they'll tell us on a heartbeat when if we acting old, like, oh, come on, and stuff. But, so, yeah, I would definitely say give your best, because that's going to separate you from everyone in your generation, pretty much, almost, because people just do enough to get by.
Hmm.
I would say that also, just know that life is full of ups and downs. Things are definitely going to happen, but those things pass. And then also, the perception that you put on things when things happen, when negative things happen, bad things happen, if you put like terrible perception on it, like if someone's going to die, yes, that is hard. I mean, we've all dealt with death. It's extremely hard, but instead, mourn that and more, but you can't live in it. Oh my God, how am I gonna? Or if your husband leaves you or your wife leaves you, like, you have to make a decision that I want to survive and I want to thrive. So, um, and then I would say, Wayne Dyer always says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And a lot of times we always look at things as being grim, like, oh gosh, I have to do this. I have to go to this job, and stuff like that. But when you change that thought pattern, the way you look at things, it gets better. I would tell me, I love you, and you are enough. You belong. You are special. So those are some of the things that I would write to myself and say.
I thought you was talking to me.
Ah, I love you too, Raymond.
So, Kim, this is where we end the conversation, but we try to do it in the same way.
Hmm.
So, my next question for you is, because success looks different for everyone, but standards don't lie. That's something that, you've really cemented here during this conversation. So, I guess when it's all said and done, what does the standard mean to you?
Hmm. I would say it's the standard. I would say maybe it's the level of honesty and discipline, the level of effort that I hold myself accountable to. Um, yeah, that I hold myself accountable to, regardless to who's around, who's looking, whether I'm by myself. It's for me. So I would just say it is just that level that I hold myself to. It's my honesty. It's being honest with myself. You're not going to always feel like showing up, but just knowing that, but I have to do this. And it's for me. Um, I would say that's the standard. Did I answer that one?
You answered it very well. Thank you very much.
Just like, because your mind, you just want to, yeah, answer it one way, but then something else pops in your mind and it's kind of a different direction. So I'm just kind of like, oh, okay.
Kim, we could continue this conversation all day. It just feels really good to kind of tap into your insights. I think your journey has been not only an amazing one, but an inspiring one. And I'm sure the audience will, take away, some of the things that you talked about in terms of how you got to where you ended up. And I know that you still got a long, long way to go. And I look forward to seeing where that pathway takes you. I'm sure it'll be amazing, just like the first part of your career has been. So I want to say thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so, so very much. I thought questions were so good. Just having me think, because a lot of times we have so many questions that need to be answered so that we can move forward in a manner that allows us to shine and to even solve some of the problems that we have. So the questions were kind of like, I'm more like, yeah, so it was great. I appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Standard. If today's episode gave you something you can apply immediately, share it with someone who's stepping into leadership or working to grow without burning out. And remember, excellence isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice.